The applause was still echoing through the banquet hall when Bernard Aldridge leaned close to his wife and spoke the words that would end their marriage. "I want you to understand something. After tonight, everything changes." Vera Aldridge kept her hands folded in her lap. Around them, 300 guests continued celebrating her husband's Lifetime Achievement Award. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across tables draped in white linen. Waiters moved between conversations carrying champagne on silver trays. The string quartet played something elegant and forgettable. Bernard had just returned from the stage where he had thanked his business partners, his project managers, his suppliers, and his marketing director. He had not mentioned his wife. "You have been nothing but dead weight," he continued, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "I married you for your father's name. For his client list. For his methods. You were business acquisition, Vera. Nothing more." She looked at him then. 31 years of marriage had taught her to read his face, and what she saw there was not anger or hesitation. It was relief. The relief of a man finally saying what he had wanted to say for decades. "I am leaving you for Karin. We have been together for 4 years now. 4 years of actually feeling alive instead of suffocating in this performance of a marriage." Karin Vance. The senior marketing director. 36 years old with ambitious eyes and an instinct for positioning herself near power. Vera had watched her at company events, always finding reasons to stand close to Bernard, always laughing at his observations, always touching his arm when she spoke. "I regretted marrying you from day one," Bernard said. "From the moment I said those vows, I knew I had made a mistake. Your father's reputation was the only thing that made the transaction worthwhile." Vera's expression did not change. She lifted her champagne glass and took a small sip, then set it down with perfect precision. Bernard waited. He had clearly expected tears, protests, perhaps a scene that would require him to play the patient husband managing an emotional wife. Instead, he received nothing but her steady gaze and a slight smile that seemed to unsettle him. "Did you hear what I said?" "I heard you," Vera replied quietly. "I am simply wondering why you chose tonight to tell me this. Here. At your celebration. Because I am done pretending gratitude for a partnership that was never real. Because Karin and I are tired of hiding. Because you deserve to finally know the truth about what this marriage has always been." "I see. That is all you have to say. What would you like me to say, Bernard?" He stared at her, confusion flickering across his features. This was not the reaction he had scripted. Vera could almost see him recalculating, trying to understand why the woman he had dismissed for 3 decades was not crumbling before him. "The divorce will be straightforward," he continued, recovering his composure. "We will split assets fairly. You can keep the house if you want it. I will be moving into the penthouse downtown. Karin has already helped me select furniture." How thoughtful of her. "I am trying to be civil about this, Vera. I am giving you the courtesy of honesty instead of letting you discover the truth some other way. Yes. You are a model of consideration." Something in her tone made Bernard's jaw tighten. He was accustomed to being the one with control, the one whose words carried weight. Her composure was taking something from him that he could not name. "We will announce the separation after the gala season ends. I do not want this to overshadow the award or the company's reputation." "Of course. Your reputation. Our reputation. The Aldridge name still means something in this industry." Vera's smile deepened almost imperceptibly. "Does it?" Before Bernard could respond, a colleague approached their table with congratulations and questions about an upcoming preservation project. Bernard transformed instantly, becoming the charming executive, the visionary leader, the man who had built an empire on excellence and integrity. Vera watched the performance. She had watched it for 31 years. When the colleague moved on, Bernard turned back to her with irritation in his eyes. "We will discuss details tomorrow. Try to enjoy the rest of the evening." He stood and walked toward a cluster of admirers, leaving Vera alone at the table with her champagne and her silence. Welcome back to another powerful story, my beloved listeners. Kindly tell me where you are watching from and what time it is where you are at. If you are new here, prepare for a story of betrayal, unexpected love, and what truly makes a family. Drop everything and listen closely. This tale of heartbreak and redemption might just change how you view love and family forever. Vera remained at the table for several minutes after Bernard left. She observed the room with the careful attention she had developed over decades of being overlooked. The other guests moved through their conversations unaware that a marriage had just ended 3 tables away from the dessert station. She watched Karin across the ballroom. The younger woman was speaking with a group of board members, but her eyes kept drifting toward Bernard with a proprietary satisfaction that Vera recognized. Karin believed she had won something valuable. She believed Bernard was the prize. Vera finished her champagne slowly. Then she collected her clutch, adjusted her silver shawl, and rose from the table with the unhurried grace of a woman who had learned that dignity was a choice made moment by moment. She walked through the gala without rushing. A few guests nodded at her. One woman whose name Vera could not remember commented on her lovely dress. Vera thanked her and continued toward the exit. At the coat check, she handed over her ticket and waited. Through the ballroom doors, she could hear the string quartet begin a new piece. She could hear laughter and the clink of glasses. She could hear the sound of her husband's world continuing without her. The valet brought her car around. She tipped him and slid behind the wheel. For a long moment, she sat in the parking garage without starting the engine. The silence pressed against her. The weight of what had just happened began to settle, not as shock but as confirmation. She had known this conversation was coming. She had not known when or where, but she had known. What Bernard did not understand, what he could never have guessed, was that Vera had been preparing for this moment for 3 years. She pulled out her phone and scrolled to a contact she had added 18 months ago but never called. "Mr. Hartwell," she said when the call connected. "This is Vera Aldridge. I believe it is time we moved forward with the matter we discussed." A pause on the other end. Then a measured voice. "I understand, Mrs. Aldridge. Can you come to my office tomorrow afternoon? I will be there at 2. She ended the call and started the car. As she drove away from the hotel, she did not look in the rearview mirror. There was nothing behind her that she needed to see. The Aldridge estate was dark when Vera arrived home. Bernard would not return tonight. He would go to Karin's apartment, to the woman who made him feel alive, and he would not spare a thought for the wife he had just discarded. The applause was still echoing through the banquet hall when Bernard Aldridge leaned close to his wife and spoke the words that would end their marriage. "I want you to understand something. After tonight, everything changes." Vera Aldridge kept her hands folded in her lap. Around them, 300 guests continued celebrating her husband's Lifetime Achievement Award. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across tables draped in white linen. Waiters moved between conversations carrying champagne on silver trays. The string quartet played something elegant and forgettable. Bernard had just returned from the stage where he had thanked his business partners, his project managers, his suppliers, and his marketing director. He had not mentioned his wife. "You have been nothing but dead weight," he continued, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "I married you for your father's name, for his client list, for his methods. You were business acquisition, Vera. Nothing more." She looked at him then. 31 years of marriage had taught her to read his face, and what she saw there was not anger or hesitation. It was relief. The relief of a man finally saying what he had wanted to say for decades. "I am leaving you for Karin. We have been together for 4 years now. 4 years of actually feeling alive instead of suffocating in this performance of a marriage." Karin Vance, the senior marketing director. 36 years old with ambitious eyes and an instinct for positioning herself near power. Vera had watched her at company events, always finding reasons to stand close to Bernard, always laughing at his observations, always touching his arm when she spoke. "I regretted marrying you from day one," Bernard said. "From the moment I said those vows, I knew I had made a mistake. Your father's reputation was the only thing that made the transaction worthwhile." Vera's expression did not change. She lifted her champagne glass and took a small sip, then set it down with perfect precision. Bernard waited. He had clearly expected tears, protests, perhaps a scene that would require him to play the patient husband managing an emotional wife. Instead, he received nothing but her steady gaze and a slight smile that seemed to unsettle him. "Did you hear what I said?" "I heard you," Vera replied quietly. "I am simply wondering why you chose tonight to tell me this. Here. At your celebration. Because I am done pretending gratitude for a partnership that was never real. Because Karin and I are tired of hiding. Because you deserve to finally know the truth about what this marriage has always been." I see. That is all you have to say. What would you like me to say, Bernard? He stared at her, confusion flickering across his features. This was not the reaction he had scripted. Vera could almost see him recalculating, trying to understand why the woman he had dismissed for 3 decades was not crumbling before him. The divorce will be straightforward, he continued, recovering his composure. We will split assets fairly. You can keep the house if you want it. I will be moving into the penthouse downtown. Karin has already helped me select furniture. How thoughtful of her. I am trying to be civil about this, Vera. I am giving you the courtesy of honesty instead of letting you discover the truth some other way. Yes. You are a model of consideration. Something in her tone made Bernard's jaw tighten. He was accustomed to being the one with control, the one whose words carried weight. Her composure was taking something from him that he could not name. We will announce the separation after the gala season ends. I do not want this to overshadow the award or the company's reputation. Of course. Your reputation. Our reputation. The Aldridge name still means something in this industry. Vera's smile deepened almost imperceptibly. Does it? Before Bernard could respond, a colleague approached their table with congratulations and questions about an upcoming preservation project. Bernard transformed instantly, becoming the charming executive, the visionary leader, the man who had built an empire on excellence and integrity. Vera watched the performance. She had watched it for 31 years. When the colleague moved on, Bernard turned back to her with irritation in his eyes. We will discuss details tomorrow. Try to enjoy the rest of the evening. He stood and walked toward a cluster of admirers, leaving Vera alone at the table with her champagne and her silence. Welcome back to another powerful story, my beloved listeners. Kindly tell me where you are watching from and what time it is where you are at. If you are new here, prepare for a story of betrayal, unexpected love, and what truly makes a family. Drop everything and listen closely. This tale of heartbreak and redemption might just change how you view love and family forever. Vera remained at the table for several minutes after Bernard left. She observed the room with the careful attention she had developed over decades of being overlooked. The other guests moved through their conversations unaware that a marriage had just ended 3 tables away from the dessert station. She watched Karin across the ballroom. The younger woman was speaking with a group of board members, but her eyes kept drifting toward Bernard with a proprietary satisfaction that Vera recognized. Karin believed she had won something valuable. She believed Bernard was the prize. Vera finished her champagne slowly. Then she collected her clutch, adjusted her silver shawl, and rose from the table with the unhurried grace of a woman who had learned that dignity was a choice made moment by moment. She walked through the gala without rushing. A few guests nodded at her. One woman whose name Vera could not remember commented on her lovely dress. Vera thanked her and continued toward the exit. At the coat check, she handed over her ticket and waited. Through the ballroom doors, she could hear the string quartet begin a new piece. She could hear laughter and the clink of glasses. She could hear the sound of her husband's world continuing without her. The valet brought her car around. She tipped him and slid behind the wheel. For a long moment, she sat in the parking garage without starting the engine. The silence pressed against her. The weight of what had just happened began to settle, not as shock but as confirmation. She had known this conversation was coming. She had not known when or where, but she had known. What Bernard did not understand, what he could never have guessed, was that Vera had been preparing for this moment for 3 years. She pulled out her phone and scrolled to a contact she had added 18 months ago but never called. Mr. Hartwell, she said when the call connected. This is Vera Aldridge. I believe it is time we moved forward with the matter we discussed. A pause on the other end. Then a measured voice. I understand, Mrs. Aldridge. Can you come to my office tomorrow afternoon? I will be there at 2. She ended the call and started the car. As she drove away from the hotel, she did not look in the rearview mirror. There was nothing behind her that she needed to see. The Aldridge estate was dark when Vera arrived home. Bernard would not return tonight. He would go to Karin's apartment, to the woman who made him feel alive, and he would not spare a thought for the wife he had just discarded. Vera walked through rooms that had once felt like home. Now they felt like evidence. 31 years of photographs and furniture and carefully chosen art, all of it suddenly revealed as set dressing for a marriage that had never been real. She did not turn on many lights. She did not pour herself wine or run a bath or do any of the things that women in her situation were supposed to do. Instead, she walked to the small study at the back of the house, the room Bernard had always dismissed as her little corner, and she unlocked the cabinet behind the gardening books. Inside were 3 years of documentation. Bank statements, contractor invoices, email printouts, inspection reports, photographs, a detailed timeline cross-referenced with project records and financial transactions. Vera had not married a man who loved her. She had known that for some time. But it was not his lack of love that had prompted her to begin watching him carefully. It was something she had overheard 3 years ago, a phone call Bernard thought she could not hear. He had been laughing with someone about the Sutton premium. About how clients still paid top dollar because they trusted the Sutton name, the reputation Vera's father had spent his life building. About how no one ever checked too closely when the Aldridge name was attached to a project. Vera had frozen in the hallway outside his office door. Her father had been dead for 5 years by then. Magnus Sutton had built his construction firm on a simple principle: the work mattered more than the profit. He had taught Vera to judge wood by its grain, joints by their fit, contractors by the questions they did not want to answer. After that phone call, Vera had started paying attention in ways she never had before. She had begun reviewing documents that passed through the household. She had started comparing project specifications to the materials she observed at job sites during her occasional visits. She had learned to recognize the difference between what Bernard promised his clients and what he actually delivered. The evidence had accumulated slowly at first, then faster as she understood the pattern. Bernard was charging clients for premium materials and delivering something cheaper. He was billing for her father's craftsmanship while providing cut-rate substitutes. He was trading on a reputation he had acquired through marriage and corrupting it for profit. She had hoped she was wrong. She had hoped there was an innocent explanation. But she was her father's daughter, and she had inherited his eye for detail and his intolerance for deception. The affair had been almost secondary. She had noticed the late nights, the new cologne, the password-protected phone. She had seen the way Karin looked at Bernard at company functions. But it was the professional betrayal that had truly awakened her, the realization that Bernard was not just cheating on her but on everything her family had built. Now she sat in her small study with 3 years of evidence spread before her and felt something unexpected. Not grief. Not anger. Something closer to resolution. The waiting was over. The pretending was over. Tomorrow she would begin the process of dismantling the life she had shared with a man who had never deserved her loyalty. But tonight, she would simply sit with the silence and the knowledge that she had been right to watch, right to document, right to prepare for this moment when Bernard believed himself invincible. He had called her dead weight. He had called her a business acquisition. He had told her that he regretted every day of their marriage. He had no idea what she knew. No idea what she had gathered. No idea that the quiet wife he had dismissed for 3 decades had been paying closer attention than he ever imagined. Vera closed the cabinet and locked it carefully. Then she went upstairs to the bedroom that was now only hers and slept more peacefully than she had in years. The morning light found Vera in her kitchen, making coffee with the same precise movement she had used for decades. The routine was unchanged even if everything beneath it had shifted. Bernard's side of the closet was half empty. He must have come by sometime in the early hours to collect clothes without waking her. Or perhaps he simply had enough at Karin's apartment that he did not need to return. It did not matter. Her phone rang at 9. She recognized her sister's number and answered. "You sound strange," Margot said without preamble. "What happened? What makes you think something happened?" "Because I called you 3 times yesterday and you did not answer. Because you texted me at midnight saying you would call me today. Because I have known you for 55 years and I can hear when something is wrong." Vera carried her coffee to the sunroom and sat in the chair that faced the garden. "Bernard is leaving me for his marketing director. He told me last night at the gala. Apparently they have been together for 4 years. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. "I'm going to kill him," Margot said finally. "I'm going to drive there and I'm going to kill him with my bare hands." "That will not be necessary." 4 years. For years, and he just told you at his award ceremony. In public. While everyone was celebrating him. He said he was tired of pretending. Pretending. Margot's voice carried 3 decades of protective older sister energy. That man has been pretending to be worthy of you since the day you met him. Our father made one mistake in his life, and it was trusting Bernard Aldridge with his daughter and his company. Vera did not disagree. She sipped her coffee and waited for Margot's initial fury to subside. "How are you, really?" Margot asked, her voice softening. "Tell me the truth." "I am relieved," Vera said, surprising herself with the honesty. "I have been waiting for this conversation for longer than you know." "What do you mean?" Vera hesitated. There were things she had not told anyone, not even her sister. Decisions she had made alone in the dark of her study, evidence she had gathered without counsel or support. "There are things about Bernard that I have discovered over the past few years. Things beyond the affair." "What kind of things?" "Do you remember what Papa used to say about a man's work being his signature on the world?" "Of course. Bernard has been forging Papa's signature. Using his reputation to charge clients for quality he never delivers. Substituting inferior materials. Falsifying documentation. Building fraud into foundations that carry the Sutton name." Margot was silent for so long that Vera wondered if the call had dropped. "You are certain?" Margot said finally. "Not a question. I have been documenting it for 3 years. I have invoices, inspection reports, bank records. I have photographs of materials that do not match project specifications. I have everything. 3 years. You have known about this for 3 years and you never told me. I kept hoping I was wrong. Or that Bernard would stop on his own. I kept waiting for him to remember that he was supposed to be building something that lasted. He never remembered. No. He never did." The conversation continued for another hour. Margot offered to fly out immediately. She offered lawyers she knew, contacts in construction oversight, 100 forms of support that Vera had not asked for but was grateful to receive. By the time they hung up, Vera had made arrangements for her sister to visit the following week. She had also outlined the basic shape of what was to come. Bernard believed he was initiating a simple divorce. He believed he held all the cards. He believed his quiet wife would accept whatever settlement he offered and disappear into whatever sad little life she had been living in his shadow. He was about to learn how wrong he was. Douglas Hartwell's office occupied the top floor of a restored Victorian building downtown. The irony was not lost on Vera as she rode the elevator up. A construction fraud attorney working in a historically preserved structure. Her father would have appreciated the poetry. Hartwell himself was a man in his early 60s with grey hair and sharp eyes that seemed to catalogue everything they observed. His handshake was firm and his manner was direct. "Mrs. Aldridge. Thank you for coming. Thank you for seeing me on short notice." He gestured to a leather chair across from his desk. "I have reviewed the materials you sent last week. I have to say, your documentation is remarkable. More thorough than most professional investigators could produce. I am a research analyst by training. When I suspect something is wrong, I investigate it properly." Hartwell nodded and opened a folder on his desk. "Let us discuss what you have found. The pattern here suggests systematic fraud over at least 5 years. Your husband has been substituting inferior materials for premium ones while charging clients premium prices. He has been falsifying inspection reports by using signatures from inspectors who never visited the sites. And he has been billing for construction methods associated with your father's legacy while delivering something far cheaper. Yes. The liability exposure here is significant. If any of these buildings develop structural problems or fail to meet code requirements, the lawsuits could be catastrophic. But there is something else." Vera waited. Several of the affected properties are historic buildings under preservation protection. The Whitmore Hotel. The Crawford Estate. The original founder's bank building. If your husband knowingly used substandard materials on protected structures, he could be facing criminal charges. "I understand." Hartwell studied her for a moment. "Mrs. Aldridge, I need to ask you directly. What is your goal here? Are you looking to gain leverage in your divorce? Are you seeking financial compensation? Or are you trying to ensure that your husband faces the full consequences of his actions?" Vera considered the question carefully. "I want to stop being complicit in his deception. I have spent 3 years watching him corrupt everything my father built. I have stayed silent because I hoped he would change, because I did not want to believe what I was seeing, because I was afraid of what would happen if I spoke. And now Now my husband has informed me that our marriage was nothing but a business transaction. That I was an acquisition rather than a partner. That every day of the past 31 years was a performance he resented. She met Hartwell's eyes. If he never valued the marriage, then I no longer have any reason to protect him from the consequences of his choices. Even if those consequences include prison, especially if they include prison. Hartwell nodded slowly. There is something almost like respect in his expression. Very well. Let me explain how we proceed. They spent the next 2 hours developing a strategy. Hartwell explained the process for filing complaints with the state licensing board. He outlined how investigations typically unfolded, how evidence would be reviewed, how Bernard's company would be audited. The key is timing, Hartwell said. We need to initiate these complaints before anyone else discovers what your husband has been doing. If his company finds out first, or if a property owner files their own complaint, it could complicate your position. How so? You have been married to Bernard for 31 years. You have had access to his financial records, his business documents, his email accounts. If this becomes a criminal investigation, someone might suggest that you were involved in the fraud. I was not involved. I know that. Your documentation proves exactly when you discovered each piece of evidence. But we need to be proactive in establishing your timeline, in making clear that you were investigating his crimes rather than participating in them. Vera nodded. She had anticipated this concern. There is one more thing, she said. The divorce filing. Yes. We should coordinate that with the complaint process. If you file for divorce after the investigation begins, it looks like you are distancing yourself from the scandal. But if you file before, it establishes that you were already separating yourself from Bernard's business affairs. I want to file this week. Hartwell raised an eyebrow. Are you certain? That is very fast. Bernard told me last night that he wants to announce the separation after the gala season ends. He is concerned about protecting his reputation. I would prefer to move on my own timeline rather than his. I understand. They set another meeting for later in the week. Hartwell walked her to the elevator. Mrs. Aldridge, he said as the doors opened. I want you to know that what you are doing takes courage. Many women in your position would accept the settlement and try to move on. You are choosing a harder path. I am choosing the honest path. There is a difference. The elevator doors closed, and Vera descended to the lobby feeling lighter than she had in years. The weight of secrets she had carried alone was beginning to shift. Soon others would know what she knew. Soon the truth would be impossible to hide. The weeks that followed required Vera to become an actress in her own life. Bernard moved into the guest house, claiming he wanted to give her space to process the divorce. In reality, he spent most nights at Karin's apartment and returned only to collect mail or maintain appearances for the household staff. Vera did not object. She did not plead or argue or demand explanations. She moved through her days with the same quiet efficiency she had always displayed, and if Bernard found her composure unsettling, he did not say so. She filed for divorce 4 days after the gala. Bernard received the papers at his office and called her within the hour. What is this? His voice carried genuine surprise. I thought we agreed to wait until after the gala season. You agreed to wait. I did not. We need to discuss this, Vera. We need to handle this properly. I have hired an attorney. His name is Douglas Hartwell. Your attorney can contact him to discuss terms. Hartwell? The construction litigation lawyer? Why would you hire someone who specializes in construction disputes? Vera let the question hang in the air for a moment. Because I believe construction may become relevant to our proceedings. What does that mean? It means you should speak with your attorney, Bernard. I am not interested in having this conversation directly. She hung up before he could respond. The next call came from Margot, who had been monitoring the situation from 3 states away. He called me, Margot said. Bernard actually called me to ask what was wrong with you. He wanted to know why you were being so cold and unreasonable. What did you tell him? I told him that I had not spoken to you in weeks, which was technically true since we had not talked since this morning. I told him that I was sure you had your reasons for whatever you were doing. And I told him that if he wanted answers, he should look in a mirror. How did he respond? He hung up on me. I do not think he enjoyed the conversation. Vera smiled, the first genuine smile she had allowed herself since the gala. Bernard had always expected the Sutton sisters to admire him. He had married one and cultivated the other, certain that his charm would keep them both compliant. He was only now beginning to discover how wrong he had been. The licensing board complaint was filed the same week as the divorce papers. Hartwell handled the process with discretion, ensuring that the initial inquiry would begin without fanfare. No press releases. No public announcements. Just a quiet investigation triggered by detailed documentation of potential fraud. Bernard remained oblivious. He was too focused on his upcoming projects, his relationship with Karin, his plans for life after Vera. He had no idea that wheels were turning in offices across the city, that investigators were beginning to compare his invoices to his delivered materials, that the reputation he had spent decades building was about to be examined with fresh and suspicious eyes. Vera watched him come and go from the guest house. She observed him loading boxes into his car, preparing for his move to the downtown penthouse. She noted the spring in his step, the confidence in his bearing, the absolute certainty that everything was proceeding according to his plan. He had no idea that his plan had already failed. He had no idea that the quiet wife he had dismissed was the one person who had been paying attention all along. 6 weeks after the gala, the first crack appeared. Bernard stormed into the main house without knocking. He found Vera in the kitchen preparing tea. "What did you tell them?" he demanded. "Tell whom?" "The licensing board. They have opened an investigation into the Whitmore project. Someone filed a complaint about material specifications." Vera poured hot water over her tea leaves with steady hands. "I do not know anything about the licensing board. This has your fingerprints all over it. The Whitmore Hotel was built using your father's techniques. You are the only one who would know enough to question the specifications." She looked at him then, meeting his eyes with an expression he could not read. "Perhaps you should be asking yourself why the specifications deserve questioning. What is that supposed to mean? It means that if the specifications are accurate, an investigation should not concern you. If they are not accurate, then the problem is not who filed the complaint but what the complaint will reveal." Bernard's face flushed with anger. "I am warning you, Vera. If you are trying to sabotage me, if you are using this divorce to destroy my company, you will regret it. I am not trying to do anything." She set down the teapot and faced him fully. "But I spent 30 years learning the difference between quality and compromise. Papa taught me well. Perhaps someone else learned to see what I see. Someone else. Perhaps one of your clients noticed something. Perhaps an inspector found an irregularity. Perhaps the truth simply became too large to hide." She turned back to her tea. "I really cannot say." Bernard stared at her. Something had shifted between them, some balance of power that he had always taken for granted. His wife was no longer behaving like the passive partner he had dismissed for decades. "This is not over," he said finally. "No, it is not." He left without another word, slamming the door behind him. Vera sipped her tea and watched through the window as he drove away too fast, tires screeching on the driveway gravel. The investigation she had triggered was just beginning. The pressure would build from here. The licensing board inquiry expanded faster than Bernard had anticipated. Within 2 weeks, it had grown to include not just the Whitmore Hotel but 3 other major preservation projects completed in the past 5 years. Vera learned these details from Hartwell during their regular meetings. She was careful never to ask questions that might reveal her level of involvement. She simply listened as her attorney explained the developments. "They are requesting documentation from your husband's company," Hartwell said. "Invoices, material receipts, inspection reports. The usual audit materials. And if the documentation does not match what was actually built, then the investigation moves to the next phase. Site inspections, material testing, expert analysis. It becomes much more difficult to explain away discrepancies when inspectors are taking core samples from foundations." Vera nodded. She had known this would happen. She had provided Hartwell with enough evidence to ensure that investigators would know exactly where to look. "There is something else," Hartwell continued. "The Preservation Society has opened their own parallel inquiry. They are concerned about the historic buildings that received Aldridge certification." What does that mean for Bernard? It means multiple agencies are now interested in his work quality. It means the pressure will come from several directions at once. It means it becomes much harder to contain. And the divorce proceedings? Proceeding normally. Your husband's attorney has requested financial disclosure. I have provided what is required by law. They have not yet realized that construction fraud might become relevant. When will they realize? When the investigation goes public. When the first news story appears. When Bernard's assets become complicated by potential liability claims. How long? Hard to say. Could be weeks. Could be months. These things move at their own pace. Vera accepted this. She had waited 3 years already. She could wait a few months more. Karin began distancing herself around the same time the investigation expanded. Vera did not witness this directly, but the signs were clear. Bernard started appearing at the main house more often, his expression distracted and worried. He made phone calls from the guesthouse patio, his voice carrying through the windows in fragments she could not quite hear. One evening, she overheard enough to understand. I do not know why you are being like this. Bernard's voice was plaintive in a way Vera had never heard before. Nothing has changed between us. A pause. Karin's response was inaudible. The investigation is nothing. A formality. Everything will be cleared up in a few weeks. Another pause. Why are you asking about liability? Why are you talking to lawyers? The conversation continued, but Bernard moved away from the window and Vera lost the thread. She did not need to hear more. Karin was beginning to calculate whether Bernard was still worth the investment. Vera understood this kind of calculus. She had watched Karin for years, observing how the younger woman positioned herself, how she attached to power, how she evaluated every relationship in terms of what it could provide. Karin had pursued Bernard because he was wealthy, successful, admired. She had no interest in a Bernard who was investigated, questioned, compromised. 3 days later, Bernard appeared in the main house looking haggard. She is pulling back, he said without preamble. Who? Karin. She is always busy. Always unavailable. She keeps asking about the investigation like she is more worried about the company than about us. Vera felt no satisfaction in this development, only a kind of tired recognition. I am sorry to hear that. Are you? The part of me that remembers who you used to be. Or who I thought you were. That part is sorry. Bernard sat down heavily in one of the kitchen chairs. Everything is falling apart. The investigation is expanding. My lawyers cannot explain why so many projects are being scrutinized at once. And now Karin is acting like I have some kind of disease she might catch. Vera poured him a cup of coffee without being asked. The habit of caretaking was difficult to break even when the marriage was over. What do you want me to say, Bernard? I do not know. He wrapped his hands around the mug but did not drink. I thought I had everything figured out. I thought I knew exactly how my life was going to go. And now? Now nothing makes sense. Vera sat across from him at the table where they had shared thousands of meals over 31 years. She looked at the man she had married, at the lines on his face and the fear in his eyes, and she felt something unexpected. Not love. Not anger. Something closer to pity. Bernard, she said quietly, have you considered that perhaps the investigation is finding real problems? That perhaps there are things in your business that deserve to be examined? He looked at her sharply. What do you mean by that? I mean that you have always been so confident. So certain that you were the smartest person in every room. Has it ever occurred to you that your certainty might be misplaced? There is nothing wrong with my business. Are you sure? Something flickered in his eyes. A shadow of doubt. A moment of uncertainty that he quickly suppressed. I know what I am doing, Vera. I have been building this company for 30 years. I know every project, every client, every detail. Then the investigation should not trouble you. He stood abruptly. You are enjoying this. Watching me struggle. Watching everything I built come under attack. Vera shook her head. I am not enjoying anything. I am simply observing what is happening. Drawing conclusions from evidence. That is what I was trained to do. Trained by who? By my father. The man whose name you used to build your empire. The man whose standards you abandoned the moment you realized no one was watching closely enough to notice. Bernard stared at her. Your father was a craftsman. He understood quality. But he never understood business. He never understood that sometimes you have to make compromises to stay competitive. Compromises. The market changed. Costs increased. Clients wanted premium results at budget prices. I did what I had to do to keep the company alive. You mean you committed fraud? The word hung between them like a blade. I mean, Bernard said slowly, that I made difficult decisions that kept hundreds of people employed. Decisions that maintained the Aldridge reputation in a competitive industry. The Aldridge reputation. Vera stood and carried her coffee cup to the sink. You mean the Sutton reputation? The one you acquired when you married me. The one you have been trading on for 3 decades while delivering something less than what my father would have found acceptable. Your father is dead, Vera. His standards died with him. The world moved on. Did it? Or did you simply decide that his standards were inconvenient? That honesty was less profitable than deception? Bernard's face had gone pale. What exactly are you accusing me of? I am not accusing you of anything. She turned to face him. I am simply suggesting that if investigators examine your projects closely, they might find that the Aldridge name no longer means what it used to mean. That the premium clients pay for is not what they receive. You have no proof of that. No. The single word seemed to unsettle him more than anything she had said before. He searched her face for evidence of bluffing and found none. What do you know, Vera? I know what I have observed over many years of marriage. I know what I have seen on job sites and in documentation that passes through this household. I know what my father taught me about evaluating construction quality. That is not an answer. It is the only answer you are going to get from me. She moved toward the door. I suggest you speak with your lawyers about the investigation. They can advise you better than I can about what evidence might exist and what it might mean. Vera. She paused but did not turn around. If you know something, if you have been gathering information to use against me, I will find out. And there will be consequences. Now she did turn. There are always consequences, Bernard. That is what you never seem to understand. Every choice has a consequence. Every compromise has a cost. The only question is how long before the bill comes due. She left him standing in the kitchen of the house they had shared for 31 years, surrounded by evidence of a life he had never truly valued and a wife he had never truly seen. The first news story appeared 2 weeks later. Vera was eating breakfast when she heard the local morning program mention the Aldridge name. She set down her fork and listened. Local preservation firm Aldridge Heritage Construction is facing questions about material quality on several high-profile historic restoration projects. Sources within the state licensing board confirm that an investigation is ongoing, though details remain confidential. The company, founded by Bernard Aldridge over 30 years ago, has been a leading name in historic preservation throughout the region. Neither Mr. Aldridge nor company representatives have responded to requests for comment. Vera finished her breakfast slowly. Then she called Margot. It is starting, she said. I saw. Margot's voice was tight with anticipation and concern. How are you feeling? Calm. Calmer than I expected. And Bernard? I have not spoken to him since the news broke. I imagine he is busy managing the crisis. He will know, Margot said. He will know you had something to do with this. He suspects. He does not know for certain. Be careful, Vera. A man like Bernard, a man who is watching everything he built collapse around him, he could become dangerous. He is not dangerous. He is desperate. There is a difference. Sometimes desperation is more dangerous than malice. Vera considered this. Her sister was not wrong. But she had spent 3 years preparing for this moment. She had documentation that protected her interests. She had legal representation that understood the full scope of what was happening. She was not defenseless. I will be careful, she promised. The phone calls started that afternoon. Neighbors wanting to know if the news was true. Former clients of Bernard's asking pointed questions. A reporter from the local paper requesting an interview with Mrs. Aldridge about her husband's legal troubles. Vera declined all of them. She was not ready to speak publicly. Not yet. Bernard arrived at the house that evening. He looked like he had aged 10 years in a single day. You did this, he said. I do not know how, but I know you are behind this. Vera was sitting in the sunroom with a book she had not been reading. She set it aside and looked at her husband with something approaching detachment. I did not contact any reporters, Bernard. I did not speak to the licensing board. I have not made any public statements about your company or your work. Then how? How did this happen? Perhaps because it was true. Perhaps because you cannot build fraud into foundations forever without someone noticing. Perhaps because the shortcuts you took to increase profits eventually became visible to people who were paying attention. Bernard sank into a chair across from her. The investigation has expanded again. The State Attorney General's office is asking questions. They are talking about possible criminal charges. I am sorry. Stop saying that. You are not sorry. You have been waiting for this. Watching me. Preparing. Vera did not deny it. She simply looked at him with the steady gaze that had unnerved him at the gala and continued to unnerve him now. How long? Bernard asked. How long have you known about my business practices? I suspected for 3 years. I confirmed it 18 months ago. The color drained from his face. 18 months. You were on a phone call with someone I could not identify. You were laughing about the Sutton premium. About how clients still paid top dollar because they trusted my father's name. About how no one checked too closely when quality was implied rather than delivered. You have been spying on me for 18 months. I have been watching. There is a difference. And you said nothing. You let me continue. You let me dig myself deeper into whatever hole you think I am in. I kept hoping you would stop on your own. That you would remember what it meant to carry the Sutton name. That some part of you still cared about building things that lasted. I cared about staying in business. I cared about keeping the company alive in a market that punishes honesty and rewards efficiency. You mean you cared about profit? About maintaining your lifestyle? About funding your affair with money you stole from clients who trusted you? I did not steal anything. You billed them for services you did not provide. For materials you did not use. For quality you did not deliver. What would you call that if not theft? Bernard stood abruptly, knocking over a small table. I am not going to sit here and be lectured by the woman I am divorcing. The woman who apparently spent 18 months building a case against me instead of trying to save our marriage. Our marriage was already dead. You told me so yourself at the gala. You said you regretted it from day one. That does not give you the right to destroy my life. Vera stood as well, her voice calm even as his rose. I did not destroy your life, Bernard. You did that yourself. One invoice at a time. One falsified inspection at a time. One substituted material at a time. I simply stopped preventing people from seeing what you had done. He moved toward her, his face contorted with rage. If I go down, you go down with me. I will tell them you were involved. That you knew about everything and helped me cover it up. Will you? And how will you explain the documentation that shows exactly when I discovered your crimes and how I responded? The timeline that proves I was investigating you, not assisting you. Bernard stopped. What documentation? Did you think I spent 18 months watching without recording what I saw? Did you think I would leave myself vulnerable to exactly the accusation you just made? For a long moment, neither of them moved. The space between them vibrated with tension, with years of grievances and disappointments and failed expectations finally coming to the surface. Then Bernard laughed. A hollow, defeated sound that carried no humor. I never knew you at all, he said. All those years. All that time. And I never had any idea who I was married to. No. You did not. He left without another word. Vera listened to his car start, to the tires on the gravel, to the sound of her husband driving away from the wreckage of everything he had built. She sat back down in her chair and picked up the book she had not been reading. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was even. The confrontation she had anticipated for years was finally over. Now all that remained was the consequence. Karin left 2 days before the expanded investigation went public. Vera heard about it from Bernard himself, who appeared at the house looking more broken than she had ever seen him. She is gone, he said without context, assuming Vera would understand. Karin. She packed up her apartment. Left a letter. Will not answer my calls or texts. I see. She said she never really loved me. Bernard's voice was hollow. She said she was using me to prove she could take whatever she wanted from whoever had it. She said being with me was a game. A way to prove she was better than you. Vera absorbed this information without visible reaction. Better than me? She hated you. I did not know that until I read the letter. She hated that you had the marriage she wanted, the stability, the social position. Taking me from you was her way of proving she could have anything you had, whenever she felt like it. And now that you are facing investigation and possible prosecution, she does not want what I had. Bernard flinched. She said I was convenient until I stopped being useful. That must be painful to hear. Is that all you have to say? Vera considered her response carefully. I could tell you that I warned you. That I knew Karin was attracted to your success rather than to you. But I do not think that would help. It would not. I could tell you that I am sorry your heart is broken. But I have limited sympathy for the pain caused by the end of an affair that destroyed our marriage. That is fair. What I will tell you, Bernard, is that you still have choices to make. The investigation is not finished. The consequences are not final. How you respond from here will determine much of what happens next. He looked at her as if seeing her clearly for the first time. Why are you being kind to me? I am not being kind. I am being honest. There is a difference. The same difference between compromise and fraud? Perhaps. Bernard sat down, uninvited, in the chair across from her. The same chair where he had confronted her days before. But now his posture was different. Defeated rather than defiant. I am going to lose everything, he said quietly. The company. The reputation. My freedom. Possibly. Yes. And you are going to watch it happen. I am going to continue doing what I have done for the past 3 years. Observing. Documenting. Drawing conclusions from evidence. The evidence you gathered against me. The evidence I gathered because I could not trust my own husband. Because I needed to understand what was happening in my own household. Because no one else was paying attention to the things that mattered. Your father's legacy. My family's legacy. The name I was born with before I took yours. Bernard was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked a question that seemed to cost him something to voice. Did you ever love me? Or was our whole marriage as fake as I accused yours of being? Vera felt the weight of 3 decades pressing against her chest. She could have answered cruelly. She could have denied ever feeling anything for the man who had dismissed her so completely. Instead, she told the truth. I loved who I thought you were. I loved the man who seemed to share my father's values. Who seemed to care about building things that lasted. Who seemed to see me as a partner rather than an accessory. But that man did not exist. He existed for a while. Or perhaps I only imagined he did. Either way, I stopped loving you long before Karin. Long before the fraud. I stopped loving you when I realized you did not see me at all. I saw you. You saw a reflection of what you wanted. A quiet wife who would manage your household and carry your name and never question your decisions. You never saw the person behind that reflection. Maybe I did not want to. No. You did not. They sat together in a silence that held the weight of decades. 2 strangers who had shared a life without ever truly knowing each other. Finally, Bernard spoke again. What happens now? Now the investigation continues. Now your lawyers try to minimize the damage. Now the consequences unfold according to their own logic. And us? There is no us, Bernard. There has not been an us for a very long time. We simply stopped pretending. He stood to leave. At the doorway, he turned back. For what it is worth, he said, I am sorry. For all of it. Vera looked at the man she had married 31 years ago. The man who had built an empire on her family's reputation and then corrupted everything that reputation represented. The man who had taken her for granted for 3 decades and then discarded her for a woman who was already gone. I believe you are sorry, she said. But being sorry does not undo the damage. He nodded once. Then he left, and Vera was alone with the silence and the settling dust of everything that had been destroyed. The trial began 6 months later. By then, Vera had stopped counting the news articles about Bernard Aldridge, the fallen preservation executive, the fraud who had built his empire on deception. The story had become familiar, repeated in variations across local and national media until it felt almost like something that had happened to someone else. She attended the trial. Not every day, but enough to witness the key moments. She sat in the gallery with her sister beside her and watched as prosecutors laid out the case she had helped build. The evidence was overwhelming. Invoices that did not match delivered materials. Inspection reports signed by inspectors who testified they had never visited the sites. Bank records showing the systematic diversion of client funds into Bernard's personal accounts. And beneath it all, threaded through every testimony and every exhibit, was the name Sutton. The reputation Bernard had married into and then exploited. The standards he had abandoned in pursuit of profit. Vera testified on the fourth day of the trial. She walked to the witness stand wearing a simple grey dress. She took the oath with a steady voice. She looked at Bernard only once, when she first entered, and found that she felt nothing but a distant sorrow. "Mrs. Aldridge," the prosecutor began, "can you tell the court how you first became aware of your husband's business practices?" "I overheard a phone conversation approximately 3 years ago. My husband was discussing what he called the Sutton Premium with someone I could not identify. The tone of the conversation suggested that clients were being charged for quality that was not being delivered. And what did you do with that information?" "I began observing more carefully, documenting what I saw, comparing project specifications to the materials I observed at job sites." "Why did you not report your suspicions immediately?" "Because I hoped I was wrong. Because I wanted to give my husband the opportunity to correct his mistakes. Because I was afraid of what would happen to my family if my suspicions were correct." The prosecutor nodded. "But eventually you did come forward." "Yes. After my husband informed me that he was leaving our marriage for another woman, I no longer had any reason to protect him from the consequences of his choices." The cross-examination was aggressive, but Vera was prepared. Bernard's defense attorney tried to suggest she had been involved in the fraud, that her documentation proved participation rather than investigation. But Hartwell had prepared her well, and her timeline was unassailable. By the time she stepped down from the witness stand, she knew that her testimony had sealed Bernard's fate. The evidence had always been clear. But her presence, her composure, her quiet dignity had made it impossible for the jury to see Bernard as anything other than the man who had betrayed his wife and his clients and his industry. The verdict came 2 weeks later. Guilty on all counts. Bernard stood motionless as the foreman read the decision. He did not look at Vera. He did not look at anyone. He simply absorbed the words that ended the life he had built. Sentencing was scheduled for the following month. Vera did not attend. By then, she had already moved on to the work of rebuilding. The farmhouse had been in the Sutton family for 4 generations. Vera drove there on a morning in early spring, 6 weeks after Bernard's conviction. The property sat on 20 acres of rolling countryside, unused since her father's death 8 years earlier. She parked in the overgrown driveway and walked toward the workshop. The building was smaller than she remembered, weathered by years of neglect, but the bones were solid. Her father had built it himself, using techniques he had learned from his own father and would later teach to her. Inside, his tools were still arranged on the walls and benches where he had left them. Planes and chisels and measuring devices, all covered with dust but otherwise intact. She ran her fingers over a dovetail jig he had made by hand, remembering the lessons he had given her here. "Quality is not about perfection," he had told her once. "Quality is about intention. It is about caring enough to do the work right, even when no one is watching." Bernard had never understood that principle. He had seen her father's reputation as an asset to be exploited rather than a standard to be maintained. He had reduced craftsmanship to a marketing angle and then abandoned even that pretense when profit proved more attractive. But the farmhouse remained. The workshop remained. The legacy remained, waiting for someone to take it up again. Vera found her sister on the porch when she emerged from the workshop. "I thought you might be here," Margot said. "I needed to see it. To remember." "And what do you remember?" Papa's hands. The way he would explain things without rushing. The patience he had for doing work properly. Margot smiled. "He would be proud of you, you know. For standing up. For telling the truth." "I do not feel proud. I feel tired. And uncertain about what comes next." "What do you want to come next?" Vera looked at the farmhouse, at the workshop, at the land her family had worked for generations. She thought about the skills her father had taught her, the standards he had instilled, the legacy he had left behind. "I want to teach," she said slowly, the idea forming as she spoke it. Papa's techniques. His methods. His philosophy about craft. There are young builders who want to learn the old ways but have no one to teach them. You want to start a school? Nothing formal. Something smaller. Apprenticeships. Hands-on training. Teaching people to build things that last, the way Papa taught me. Using the Sutton name. Using my name. The one I was born with. The one I never should have let disappear behind someone else's ambitions. Margot reached out and took her sister's hand. "Then that is what you should do." They stood together on the porch of the farmhouse, looking out at the land and the trees and the sky. Behind them was 3 decades of marriage to a man who had never deserved her. Ahead was something new. Something built on foundations that would not crack or crumble or betray the people who trusted them. Vera did not know exactly how to begin. She only knew that she was ready. The sentencing hearing happened without her. Margot attended and reported back by phone that evening. Bernard had received 12 years. He would be eligible for parole in 8. He was ordered to pay full restitution to the clients he had defrauded, which meant selling everything he owned. "He looked broken," Margot said. "Smaller than I have ever seen him." Vera listened without comment. "He asked about you. Whether you were there. Whether you might visit him. And what did you tell him?" "I told him you were building something new. That you had moved on. That you were finally becoming the person you were always supposed to be." Vera closed her eyes and felt the weight of 31 years lifting from her shoulders. Not all at once. Not completely. But enough that she could breathe more easily than she had in a very long time. "Thank you," she said to her sister. "For everything. For being there. Always," Margot replied. After they hung up, Vera walked through the farmhouse that was slowly becoming a home again. She had begun renovations the week before, starting with the kitchen where she would eventually host dinners for her students and colleagues. The work was proceeding slowly, the way good work always did. There was no rushing quality. No shortcuts that would not eventually require correction. Every decision she made was one she could stand behind for decades. In the workshop, she had begun organizing her father's tools. Cleaning them. Sharpening them. Preparing them for hands that would learn their purposes and pass them forward to the next generation. The first apprentice would arrive in 3 months. A young woman named Elena who had reached out after reading about Vera's plans in a trade publication. Elena had studied construction engineering but felt something was missing. She wanted to learn the old methods. The techniques that required patience and skill rather than just machinery and speed. There would be others. Vera knew this with a certainty that surprised her. The hunger for authentic craftsmanship had not disappeared just because Bernard and people like him had tried to substitute profit for quality. It had simply gone underground, waiting for someone to call it back. She would be that someone. Not because she was exceptional, but because she had been taught by someone exceptional and had never forgotten his lessons. The evening light faded over the farmhouse as Vera settled into the chair by the window. On the table beside her was a letter that had arrived that morning. It was from Bernard, written on prison stationery, postmarked from a federal facility 300 miles away. She had not opened it yet. She was not sure she would. He had things to say to her. Apologies to offer. Explanations to provide. She did not doubt his sincerity, at least partially. Prison had a way of creating reflection that freedom did not require. But she was not sure his words mattered anymore. Not to her present. Not to her future. She set the letter aside and looked out the window at the land her family had worked for generations. The trees were beginning to bud. The fields would need attention soon. There was work to be done. And for the first time in 3 decades, the work was entirely her own. She did not open the letter that night. She was not sure she ever would. Instead, she went to bed in the room where her father had slept as a child, where his parents had slept before him, where generations of Suttons had rested after days of honest labor. Tomorrow she would continue the renovations. Tomorrow she would plan the curriculum for her first apprentice. Tomorrow she would take another step toward becoming the person she was supposed to be. But tonight, she would simply rest. The silence of the farmhouse wrapped around her like a blanket. Outside, an owl called somewhere in the darkness. Inside, the old walls settled and creaked with the familiar sounds of a building that had been loved and maintained and built to last. This was her legacy now. Not the wreckage of her marriage. Not the scandal of her husband's crimes. This place. This purpose. This quiet determination to build something that mattered. Vera closed her eyes and let the silence carry her towards sleep. And in the darkness, for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt something that might have been peace. The letter sat on the kitchen table for 3 days before Vera finally decided what to do with it. She had carried it from room to room without meaning to, setting it down on counters and windowsills and then finding it again hours later. It followed her through the farmhouse like an uninvited guest, demanding attention she was not ready to give. On the 4th morning, she sat down with her coffee and picked up the envelope. Bernard's handwriting on the front. The return address of a federal correctional facility. The weight of words she had not yet read. She thought about what might be inside. Apologies. Certainly. Explanations. Perhaps accusations. Perhaps the kind of self-justification that Bernard had always been skilled at producing. He had spent his entire career convincing people that his choices were reasonable, that his compromises were necessary, that his shortcuts were simply good business. She did not need to read more of that. She had heard enough of it to last several lifetimes. But there was another possibility. The possibility that Bernard had finally seen himself clearly. That the isolation of prison had stripped away the defenses he had built over decades. That somewhere in those handwritten pages was genuine remorse from a man who had finally understood what he had destroyed. Did she want to know if that was true? Vera turned the envelope over in her hands. The seal was still intact. The contents were still unknown. She could open it and read whatever Bernard had written. Or she could set it aside and continue building the life she had started without him. She thought about her father. About the lessons he had taught her in the workshop that was slowly coming back to life. About the standards he had maintained even when no one was watching. Quality is not about perfection, he had said. Quality is about intention. What was her intention here? What did she hope to gain from reading Bernard's words? Forgiveness was not something she was ready to offer. Not because she was bitter, but because forgiveness required something from the person being forgiven. It required change. It required accountability. It required the kind of sustained transformation that could not be accomplished in a few months of imprisonment. Understanding was not something she needed. She already understood Bernard better than he had ever understood himself. She had watched him for 31 years. She had documented his choices for 3 of those years. She knew exactly who he was and what he had done. Closure was a word people used when they wanted permission to stop feeling something. But Vera's feelings about Bernard had already settled into something manageable. She did not hate him. She did not love him. She simply no longer organized her life around him. So what would reading this letter accomplish? She set it down on the table and looked out the window at the morning light spreading across the fields. The trees were fully leafed now. The workshop renovation was nearly complete. In 2 months, Elena would arrive to begin her apprenticeship. The future was taking shape. The past was behind her. Vera stood and carried the letter to the fireplace in the living room. She had not lit a fire in weeks, but the tools were still there. Matches. Kindling. The infrastructure for burning things that no longer served a purpose. She held the envelope over the cold grate for a long moment. Then she set it on the mantel and walked away. Not today. Perhaps not ever. But she was not ready to destroy it either. Some decisions could wait. The workshop renovation took longer than Vera had anticipated, but she did not mind the delay. There was something meditative about the process. Stripping old finishes. Repairing damaged joints. Replacing windows that had grown cloudy with age. Each task required attention and patience, the same qualities her father had tried to instill in her decades ago. She hired local craftsmen to help with the structural work, choosing them carefully based on reputation and references. The men and women who showed up were curious about her project but respectful of her expertise. Word had spread through the regional construction community about who she was and what she was building. The daughter of Magnus Sutton. The ex-wife of Bernard Aldridge. The woman who had helped bring down one of the industry's most prominent frauds. Some people treated her with suspicion, as if her association with Bernard might be contagious. Others treated her with something approaching reverence, grateful that someone had finally exposed the shortcuts and compromises that everyone had suspected but no one had been willing to name. Vera accepted both reactions with the same quiet composure. She was not interested in being a symbol or a cautionary tale. She was simply interested in doing the work. The workbenches were rebuilt to her father's specifications. The tool storage was reorganized according to his system. The windows were replaced with glass that let in natural light without glare. The floor was refinished with the same techniques Magnus Sutton had used in his own workshop 60 years before. By midsummer, the space was ready. Vera stood in the center of the workshop and breathed in the smell of sawdust and linseed oil. The scent transported her back to childhood, to afternoons spent watching her father's hands shape wood into something beautiful and lasting. He would have loved this, she thought. Not the circumstances that brought her here, but this. The continuation of something he had started. The passing forward of knowledge that might otherwise have been lost. Margot arrived for a visit the week before Elena was scheduled to begin. The sisters walked the property together, Vera pointing out the changes she had made and the plans she still had for the future. A small residence for apprentices who needed housing. A materials shed for lumber storage. Eventually, perhaps, a gallery where finished projects could be displayed. "You have been busy," Margot observed. "I have been purposeful. There is a difference." They settled on the porch with glasses of iced tea and watched the afternoon shadows lengthen across the fields. "Have you heard from him?" Margot asked. Vera knew who she meant. "Bernard has written several times. I have not opened the letters." "Several times?" "For letters since the sentencing. I keep them on the mantel. I do not know why." Margot considered this. "Maybe you are not ready to close that chapter completely. Or maybe I am waiting to see if the letters stop. If his remorse is genuine or just another performance. Does it matter which?" Vera thought about the question. "I suppose not. What he feels does not change what he did. And what he did does not change who I am becoming." "Who are you becoming?" "Someone who builds things that last. Someone who teaches others to do the same. Someone who carries forward what Papa started instead of letting it disappear." "That sounds like enough." "It is more than enough. It is everything." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun continued its descent. The farmhouse creaked and settled around them, the sounds of a structure that had weathered decades and would weather decades more. "There is something I need to tell you," Margot said eventually. Vera turned to look at her sister. The tone in Margot's voice suggested something serious. "Karin contacted me last week." The name landed like a stone in still water. Vera felt the ripples spread through her chest but kept her expression neutral. What did she want? To apologize? Apparently. She is in some kind of recovery program. Making amends is part of the process. And she thought you were the appropriate person to receive her amends. She wanted me to pass along a message to you. She said she knows you would not take her call directly. Vera absorbed this information. She had not thought about Karin in months. The woman who had taken her husband had become irrelevant the moment Bernard's conviction was announced. Karin's betrayal had been absorbed into the larger betrayal. It no longer required separate attention. What was the message? That she is sorry for the pain she caused. That she understands now that she was using Bernard to hurt you, and that hurting you was her real goal all along. That she hoped someday you might be able to forgive her. Vera was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked, "What did you tell her?" "I told her that forgiveness was not mine to offer. I told her that you were building a new life and did not need her apology to move forward. I told her that if she was truly sorry, she would leave you alone and work on becoming a better person without expecting anything from you in return." That was the right thing to say. "I thought so." The sisters returned to their silence. The sun was nearly down now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that would have seemed excessive in a painting but felt exactly right in reality. "Does it bother you?" Margot asked. Knowing that she wanted to hurt you specifically, Vera considered the question. "It explains things I did not understand before. Why she pursued Bernard so aggressively. Why she seemed to enjoy my company even while betraying me. She was not just taking my husband. She was proving something to herself about her own power. That is a sad way to live." Yes, it is. Do you feel sorry for her? I feel something. Not quite pity. More like recognition. She was so focused on taking what I had that she never built anything of her own. And now she has neither. While you have all of this. Vera looked at the farmhouse, the workshop, the field spreading toward the tree line. While I have all of this. Yes. Elena Chen arrived on a Tuesday morning in early September. She was 26 years old, small and serious, with calloused hands that suggested she was no stranger to physical work. She carried a single duffel bag and a toolbox that had clearly been well used. Mrs. Aldridge? She stood at the edge of the driveway, uncertain of her welcome despite the correspondence they had exchanged over the past months. Please call me Vera. She walked down to meet the young woman and extended her hand. Welcome to the Sutton workshop. Elena's grip was firm. Thank you for accepting me. I know you had many applicants. I had many applicants who wanted to add a line to their resume. You were one of the few who seemed to understand what I am actually trying to teach. She led Elena inside and showed her the small apartment above the workshop where she would live during her apprenticeship. The space was simple but comfortable, with a bed, a desk, a small kitchen, and windows that looked out over the fields. It is beautiful here, Elena said quietly. It is peaceful. That is not always the same thing. They spent the first week getting to know each other. Vera learned that Elena had grown up in a family of engineers who valued precision and efficiency above all else. She had excelled in her studies but felt increasingly disconnected from the work she was being trained to do. Everything I built in school was designed to be fast and cheap, Elena explained one evening over dinner. Modular systems. Prefabricated components. Structures that were never meant to outlast their mortgages. And that bothered you. It felt like we were building disposability into everything. Like we had given up on the idea that structures could mean something beyond their immediate function. Vera nodded. She recognized the frustration. She had seen it in Bernard when he first started working with her father, before profit had eroded his principles. My father believed that buildings were a kind of promise, she said. A promise from the people who made them to the people who would use them. A promise that the work was done with care, that the materials were chosen with intention, that the structure would serve its purpose for generations. That is what I want to learn. Not just the techniques, but the philosophy behind them. Then you have come to the right place. The teaching began slowly. Vera did not believe in overwhelming her students with information. She believed in demonstrating principles through practice, in allowing understanding to develop organically through repetition and observation. They started with hand tools. Elena had been trained on power equipment, on machines that did the work faster and with less physical effort. But Vera insisted on beginning with the basics. When you use a hand plane, she explained, you develop a relationship with the wood. You feel its resistance. You learn its grain. You understand how it wants to be shaped. Elena struggled at first. Her strokes were uneven, her pressure inconsistent. The surfaces she produced were rough and unfinished. But she did not complain. She did not ask for shortcuts. She simply continued practicing, hour after hour, day after day, until her hands began to remember what her mind was still learning. By the end of the first month, Elena could produce a smooth, even surface with consistent strokes. It was a small accomplishment in the larger scope of what she needed to learn, but Vera recognized its significance. You are beginning to understand, she told Elena one afternoon. The tool is not separate from you. It is an extension of your intention. Elena looked at the plane in her hands with new appreciation. My professors never talked about intention. They talked about efficiency, about optimization, about reducing labor costs. Those things matter in their context, but they are not the foundation of craft. The foundation is caring enough to do the work right, even when no one is watching. Elena nodded slowly. Your father said that, did he not? Yes, he did. They worked together in companionable silence, the only sounds the whisper of plane against wood and the soft settling of sawdust on the workshop floor. The second letter from Karin arrived in October. Vera recognized the handwriting immediately, though the return address was different. Karin had moved, apparently. Starting over in a new city, like so many people did when they wanted to escape the consequences of their choices. She set the letter aside without opening it. Unlike Bernard's letters, which she kept on the mantel, She placed Karin's correspondence directly into the recycling bin. There was nothing Karin could say that Vera needed to hear. The apology had already been delivered through Margot. Any additional communication was about Karin's needs, not Vera's. And Vera had no obligation to participate in someone else's redemption narrative. Elena noticed the letter when she came in for lunch. "Something from your past?" she asked carefully. "Something that wants to be part of my present," Vera replied. "But I have other priorities." Elena did not press further. She was learning that Vera shared information when she was ready and not before. It was another lesson in patience, one that applied equally to woodworking and to human relationships. Bernard's fifth letter arrived 2 weeks later. This one Vera opened. She was not sure why this letter felt different from the others. Perhaps it was the change in seasons, the shortening days that encouraged reflection. Perhaps it was the progress she had made with Elena, the sense that her new life was taking solid shape. Perhaps she was simply ready in a way she had not been before. She sat in the living room with a single page in her hands and read her husband's words for the first time since his imprisonment. "Dear Vera, I do not expect you to read this. I do not expect you to respond. I am writing because I need to say these things, even if they disappear into silence. I have had time to think here. More time than I have ever had in my life. And I have used that time to look at who I became and how I became it. You were right about everything. About the fraud. About the betrayal of your father's legacy. About the way I treated you as a convenience rather than a partner. You saw me clearly when I could not see myself at all. I told you at the gala that I regretted marrying you from day one. That was a lie. What I actually regretted was my own failure to become the man you deserved. I regretted watching you believe in me while knowing I was not worthy of that belief. I regretted every shortcut I took, every compromise I made, every time I chose profit over principle. Your father trusted me with 2 things. His daughter and his legacy. I betrayed both. I do not ask for your forgiveness. I have not earned it and may never earn it. I only ask that you know that I understand now what I did not understand then. You were never the problem in our marriage. I was. I hope you are building something beautiful with the time you have left. I hope you find the peace I could never give you. I hope the Sutton name means what it used to mean, what it should always have meant. I am sorry. Those words are not enough, but they are all I have. Bernard. Vera read the letter twice. Then she folded it carefully and returned it to its envelope. She did not feel the vindication she might have expected. She did not feel the closure that people spoke of as if it were a destination to be reached. She simply felt the quiet acknowledgement of something true being spoken at last. Bernard had finally seen himself clearly. It had taken prison to accomplish what 31 years of marriage could not. But it had happened. She placed the letter on the mantel with the others. Then she went to the workshop where Elena was practicing dovetail joints, and she began teaching again. The first major project came in November. A woman named Ruth Pemberton contacted Vera through the Historic Preservation Network. Ruth had inherited a Victorian cottage from her grandmother and wanted to restore it using traditional methods. She had heard about the Sutton workshop and wondered if Vera might be willing to take on the commission. Vera visited the property on a grey afternoon when the trees were nearly bare. The cottage was small but beautiful, with original millwork and plaster details that had survived a century of use. It needed attention but not rescue. The bones were sound. "My grandmother loved this house," Ruth said as they walked through the rooms. "She always said it was built by people who cared about their work. I want to honor that." Vera ran her hands along a window frame, feeling the quality of the joinery beneath decades of paint. "Your grandmother was right. This house was built with intention. Can you help me preserve that?" "I can try. But I should be honest with you about something first." Ruth looked at her with concern. "What is it?" "My husband was Bernard Aldridge, the man who was convicted of construction fraud earlier this year. Some people in this industry will not work with me because of that association." Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I know who your husband was. I also know who your father was. Magnus Sutton built my grandmother's garden shed 40 years ago. It is still standing. Still perfect. Then you understand what I am trying to continue." "I do. And I would be honored to have you work on this house." They shook hands in the parlor of the cottage while November light filtered through windows that would soon be restored to their original clarity. The project became Elena's first real commission. Vera supervised closely, but she let her apprentice take the lead on the window restoration. Elena measured and documented each frame before removal. She researched the original glazing techniques. She sourced materials that matched the historic specifications. The work was slow and meticulous. Elena made mistakes and corrected them. She grew frustrated and pushed through. She developed the patience that separated craftspeople from laborious. "You are ready for this," Vera told her one afternoon as they examined a completed window together. "You understand what we are trying to preserve." "I understand better than I did when I arrived," Elena replied. "But I still have so much to learn." That feeling never goes away. My father said he was still learning the week before he died. The difference between a student and a master is not the absence of uncertainty. It is the willingness to continue despite it. Elena returned to her work with renewed focus. Vera watched her for a moment, seeing echoes of her own younger self in the concentration and care with which Elena approached each task. The legacy was being passed forward. That was enough. That was everything. Winter settled over the farmhouse like a familiar guest. Vera had always loved this season, the way it forced everything to slow down and turn inward. The workshop stayed warm with wood-burning stoves, and the projects continued at a measured pace that suited the shorter days. Elena had grown significantly in skill and confidence. She was now capable of working independently on routine tasks, freeing Vera to focus on more complex restoration challenges. They had developed a rhythm together, a partnership built on mutual respect and shared purpose. Margot visited for the holidays, bringing news from the outside world that Vera had mostly stopped following. The Aldridge company had been dissolved completely. The assets had been sold to pay restitution. The buildings Bernard had corrupted were being inspected and, where necessary, remediated. "His name has become a warning," Margot said over Christmas dinner. "People use it to describe what happens when profit replaces principle." "That is fitting," Vera replied. "Though I wish the warning had not required so much damage to deliver." "Do you ever think about visiting him?" The question surprised Vera. She had not considered the possibility in months. "No," she said after a moment. "I do not think that would serve either of us. He asks about you in his letters. Whether you are well. Whether the workshop is succeeding. You have been reading his letters? He writes to me sometimes." Margot looked almost apologetic. "I think he needs someone to hear him. And I am the closest thing he has to family now." Vera absorbed this information. She was not angry. Margot had always been more forgiving than she was, more willing to extend compassion to people who had caused harm. "What do you tell him?" "I tell him you are thriving. I tell him the workshop is beautiful. I tell him that his crimes did not destroy the Sutton legacy. They may have actually strengthened it." "How so?" "Because now everyone knows what you stood for. What your father stood for. The contrast with what Bernard did has reminded people why integrity matters." Vera considered this perspective. She had not thought about her situation in those terms. She had been so focused on building forward that she had not considered how the wreckage behind her might be serving a purpose of its own. "I suppose that is something," she said finally. "It is more than something. It is redemption. Not his redemption. Yours." They finished their meal in thoughtful silence. Outside, snow began to fall, covering the fields in a layer of white that would melt by morning but was beautiful while it lasted. The spring brought new apprentices. 2 young builders joined Elena at the Sutton workshop, drawn by word of mouth and the reputation Vera was developing in the preservation community. Michael was a former contractor who had grown disillusioned with the industry's emphasis on speed over quality. Sarah was a recent architecture graduate who wanted hands-on experience with traditional construction methods. The workshop expanded to accommodate them. Vera hired additional help for the business side of operations so she could focus on teaching. The small community she had envisioned was beginning to take shape. One afternoon in April, she stood on the porch watching her 3 apprentices work together on a timber frame for a client's garden pavilion. Their movements were coordinated, purposeful, efficient without being rushed. They communicated in the shorthand that develops between people who share a common language of craft. "This is what I wanted," Vera realized. "This is what I was building toward all along." Not revenge against Bernard. Not vindication for her father. Simply this. The continuation of something valuable. The passing forward of knowledge that might otherwise have been lost. Elena approached the porch with a question about joint specifications. Vera answered with a drawing and a brief explanation. Elena nodded and returned to work. The interaction took less than a minute. But it contained everything that mattered. Teacher and student. Question and answer. Knowledge shared and knowledge received. This was her legacy now. Not the wreckage of her marriage or the scandal of her husband's crimes. This. The parole hearing was scheduled for June. Vera learned about it from Margot, who had received notification as Bernard's only remaining family contact. He would be eligible for early release if the board determined he had shown sufficient rehabilitation. They want to know if you will provide a statement, Margot said over the phone. Either supporting or opposing his release. Vera was in the workshop when she received the call. Around her, the sounds of her apprentices working filled the space with purpose and productivity. What kind of statement? They want to know how his crimes affected you. Whether you believe he has changed. Whether you think he deserves early release. And what do you think I should say? I think you should say whatever is true for you. I cannot tell you what that is. Vera walked outside, seeking privacy for a conversation that required more thought than she had expected to give it. What would happen if I said nothing? Then the board would make their decision based on other factors. His behavior in prison. His participation in programs. The recommendations of correctional staff. And if I oppose his release? Then he would likely serve more of his sentence. Perhaps all of it. Vera looked out at the fields where spring was unfolding in shades of green she had forgotten existed during the long winter. The trees were leafing. The gardens were awakening. Everything was renewing itself. I need time to think about this, she said. Of course. The hearing is not until next month. There is no rush. After hanging up, Vera sat on the porch and considered her options. She could oppose Bernard's release. She had every right to do so. His crimes had damaged her life, her family's reputation, countless clients who had trusted him. Justice would be served by requiring him to complete his full sentence. But justice was not the same as vengeance. And Vera was no longer certain which motivation would drive her if she chose to speak against him. She could support his release. Bernard had acknowledged his crimes. He had expressed genuine remorse in his letters. Perhaps he had changed enough to deserve a second chance at freedom. But support implied forgiveness. And Vera was not sure she had arrived at forgiveness yet. She had arrived at acceptance. At peace. At a life that no longer revolved around what Bernard had done. But forgiveness was something different. Something she might never fully achieve. Or she could say nothing. Let the process unfold without her input. Allow Bernard's fate to be determined by factors that had nothing to do with her. This option appealed to her most. Not because she was indifferent to the outcome, but because she was tired of being defined by her relationship to Bernard Aldridge. She had spent 31 years as his wife. She had spent 3 years gathering evidence against him. She had spent another year rebuilding in the aftermath of his destruction. She was ready to simply be Vera Sutton again. The woman she had been before she ever met him. The decision came to her on a morning in late May. She was teaching Elena the proper technique for cutting dovetails by hand when the answer crystallized with unexpected clarity. Vera set down her tools and looked at her apprentice. Can you continue without me for a few minutes? Of course. Is everything all right? Everything is fine. I just realized something I need to write down. She went to her study and composed a brief letter to the parole board. To whom it may concern. I am Vera Sutton, formerly Vera Aldridge, the ex-wife of Bernard Aldridge. I understand you are considering his application for early release. I have chosen not to provide a detailed statement regarding his crimes or their impact on my life. Those matters are documented in court records and do not require my repetition. What I will say is this: I have no desire to see Bernard suffer beyond what justice requires. I also have no desire to advocate for his release. These are not contradictory positions. My life has moved forward. I am building something meaningful with the time I have remaining. Bernard's presence or absence in the world does not affect that work. I trust the board to make an appropriate decision based on the evidence before them. I ask only that my neutrality be understood as exactly that. Neither opposition nor support. Simply the acknowledgement that Bernard Aldridge is no longer a factor in how I live my life. Vera Sutton. She sealed the letter and set it aside for mailing. Then she returned to the workshop where Elena was waiting with questions about the dovetail technique. The teaching continued. The work continued. The legacy continued. And somewhere in a federal facility 300 miles away, a man she used to know awaited a decision that would shape his future without shaping hers. The parole board denied Bernard's request. Vera learned this from Margot, who called with the news on a Thursday afternoon in June. The board had determined that Bernard had not yet demonstrated sufficient rehabilitation to warrant early release. He would remain incarcerated for at least 2 more years before becoming eligible again. How do you feel about it? Margot asked. I feel nothing, Vera replied honestly. It does not change anything for me. He was disappointed, apparently. He had convinced himself that he would be released. That he would have a chance to start over. He will still have that chance. Just later than he hoped. Do you think he can actually change? I mean really change. Not just say the right things to a parole board. Vera considered the question. She thought about the letters Bernard had written, the remorse he had expressed, the clarity he seemed to have developed about his own failures. I think people can change, she said finally. Whether Bernard will is not something I can predict. But I hope he does. Not for my sake. For his own. That is generous of you. It is not generous. It is practical. Holding on to anger takes energy I would rather spend elsewhere. They talked for a few more minutes about family matters and then said their goodbyes. Vera returned to the workshop where her apprentices were finishing a set of windows for Ruth Pemberton's cottage. The project was nearly complete. 3 months of careful work had restored the Victorian cottage to something approaching its original glory. New windows that matched the historic specifications. Repaired millwork that honored the craftsmanship of the original builders. A structure that would serve its purpose for another century if properly maintained. Ruth visited the following week to inspect the completed work. She walked through the cottage with tears in her eyes. My grandmother would have loved this, she said. You understood exactly what she valued about this house. We tried to honor the original builders, Vera replied. They cared about their work. We wanted to continue that caring. You have. More than I could have hoped. They stood together in the parlor where the afternoon light came through windows that had been carefully restored to their original clarity. The wood glowed with a warmth that only quality materials and proper finishing could achieve. I want to tell people about what you have done here, Ruth said. Other homeowners with historic properties. Other people who want to preserve what is being lost. I would appreciate that. The Sutton workshop deserves to be known. What you are building here matters. Vera felt the weight of those words settle into her chest. What she was building mattered. After 31 years of being dismissed as dead weight, as a business acquisition, as someone who contributed nothing of value, she was finally building something that mattered. Thank you, she said simply. That means more than you know. The summer passed in a rhythm of teaching and building. New projects came in steadily. A historic barn restoration. A set of reproduction doors for a 19th century mansion. A timber frame for a community center that wanted to honor traditional construction methods. Vera's reputation grew. Articles appeared in preservation journals and trade publications. Interviews were requested and occasionally granted. The Sutton workshop became known as a place where craft was taken seriously, where speed was sacrificed for quality, where the old ways were being preserved and passed forward. Elena completed her apprenticeship in August. She stayed on as a junior craftsperson, ready to begin teaching when the next generation of apprentices arrived. Michael and Sarah continued their training, each developing the skills and judgment that would eventually allow them to work independently. The community Vera had envisioned was becoming real. Not just a workshop, but a living tradition. A chain of knowledge stretching from her father through her to the young builders who would carry it into the future. One evening in late summer, Vera sat on the porch and watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and orange. Her apprentices had gone home for the day. The workshop was quiet. The fields stretched out before her, the same fields her family had worked for 4 generations. She thought about the woman she had been a year ago. sitting in a restaurant while her husband told her that their marriage had been a lie. Smiling through the devastation because she had already prepared for this moment without knowing exactly when it would come. That woman felt like a stranger now. Not because she had changed dramatically, but because she had finally become who she was always supposed to be. The quiet observer. The patient teacher. The builder of things that lasted. She did not need Bernard's recognition to know her worth. She did not need Karin's apology to find peace. She did not need the validation of industry awards or media attention or public acknowledgement. She needed only this. The work. The teaching. The continuation of something valuable. That was enough. That was everything. The first anniversary of the Sutton workshop fell on a crisp day in early October. Vera did not plan a celebration. But her apprentices surprised her with a small gathering in the workshop, complete with a cake decorated to look like a dovetail joint and a handmade card signed by everyone who had studied or worked with her over the past year. "You have given us something we could not find anywhere else," Elena said, speaking for the group. "A connection to craft that goes beyond technique. A reason to care about the work itself, not just the outcome." Vera was moved more than she expected. She had not allowed herself to feel pride in what she had built, perhaps because pride felt too close to the arrogance that had characterized Bernard. But this was different. This was gratitude reflected back from people whose lives she had touched. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion she rarely displayed. "All of you. This past year has been the best year of my life." They ate cake and shared stories and laughed together in the workshop where sawdust still hung in the air from the day's work. The light faded outside, but the warmth inside remained. Later that evening, after everyone had gone, Vera walked to the mantel where Bernard's letters still sat in a neat stack. She had not added to the collection in months. He had stopped writing after the parole denial, apparently accepting that his messages would never receive responses. She picked up the stack and weighed it in her hands. 5 letters. Thousands of words of remorse and explanation and apology. The accumulated attempt of a broken man to make amends for decades of damage. She could burn them now. The fireplace was ready. The matches were at hand. She could reduce Bernard's words to ash and watch them disappear up the chimney. But she did not. Instead, she carried the letters to her study and placed them in a drawer. Not on display, but not destroyed either. Artifacts of a past she had survived. Evidence of a chapter that was closed but not erased. Forgiveness, she was learning, did not require forgetting. It did not require reconciliation or relationship or any ongoing connection to the person who had caused harm. It simply required letting go of the desire for that person to suffer. And she had let go. Somewhere in the past year, without ceremony or announcement, she had released her grip on the anger and resentment that had once felt so justified. Bernard would serve his time and eventually be released. He would try to rebuild his life with whatever resources remained to him. He might succeed or fail. He might change or remain the same. His path was no longer intertwined with hers. And that was its own kind of freedom. Spring came again to the farmhouse, bringing with it new growth and new possibilities. For new apprentices arrived to join the program. The workshop expanded to accommodate them, with a second building under construction using the same traditional methods Vera taught inside. Ruth Pemberton's cottage had become a local landmark, featured in preservation magazines and visited by architecture students who wanted to see what careful restoration could accomplish. Ruth herself had become an advocate for the Sutton workshop, recommending Vera's services to everyone she knew with historic properties. The reputation continued to grow. The waiting list for apprenticeships grew longer. The projects grew more ambitious. What had started as one woman's attempt to honor her father's legacy had become something larger, a movement almost, toward reclaiming craft in an age of convenience. Vera accepted this growth with the same quiet composure she had shown during her marriage's collapse. She did not seek recognition or fame. She simply continued doing the work, teaching the students, building the structures that would outlast everyone involved in their creation. On a morning in April, exactly 2 years after the gala where Bernard had announced their marriage was over, Vera stood in her workshop and looked at what she had built. Workbenches arranged with her father's precision. Tools hung in their proper places. Apprentices focused on their tasks with the concentration she had taught them to cultivate. Sunlight streaming through windows she had restored herself. This was her answer to everything Bernard had said that night. Not words. Not arguments. Not revenge or vindication. Simply this. A life that mattered. Work that lasted. A legacy that would continue long after she was gone. Elena approached with a question about a challenging joint she was attempting. Vera answered with a demonstration, her hands moving with the confidence of decades of practice. Elena watched, absorbed the lesson, and returned to try again. The interaction took less than 2 minutes. But it contained everything that mattered. Teacher and student. Question and answer. Knowledge shared and knowledge received. The chain continuing, link by link, into a future none of them could see but all of them were building toward. The letter arrived without warning. Vera was sorting mail on a Wednesday afternoon when she recognized Karin's handwriting on an envelope postmarked from somewhere on the West Coast. She set it aside initially, intending to discard it unread like the previous attempts. But something stopped her. Perhaps it was the 2 years of distance that had accumulated since their last indirect contact. Perhaps it was the peace she had found that made her less afraid of being disturbed. Perhaps she was simply curious about what Karin might have to say after so much time. She opened the letter and read. Dear Vera, I do not expect you to read this. I do not deserve your attention or your time. But I need to say something that I could not say before, when I was still too close to everything that happened. I was wrong. Not just about Bernard, not just about the affair, but about everything. About who I was and what I wanted and what actually mattered in life. I spent years believing that taking things from other people proved I was powerful. That success meant having what others had. That my worth was measured by my ability to compete and win. You had everything I thought I wanted. A stable marriage. A respected position. A sense of belonging somewhere. I hated you for it, even though you had never done anything to me except be kind. Taking Bernard was my way of proving that I could have what you had. That nothing was protected from me. That I was stronger than you, smarter than you, more deserving than you. But I did not take anything that mattered. I took a man who did not value what he had. I took a position in a company built on fraud. I took a life that was hollow at its core. You, meanwhile, built something real. I have followed the news about your workshop from a distance. I have seen what you created after everything fell apart. And I understand now that I never had what you have. I never had the capacity to build rather than take. I am trying to change. I do not know if I will succeed. But I wanted you to know that I finally see clearly what I refused to see before. You won. Not because Bernard is in prison or because my reputation was destroyed or because I am alone. You won because you knew who you were and you built a life that reflected that knowledge. I never had that. I still do not know if I am capable of it. I will not contact you again. This letter is my final attempt to say what needs to be said. I am sorry for the pain I caused. I am sorry for the woman I was. I am sorry for everything. Karin. Vera read the letter twice. Then she folded it and placed it in the drawer with Bernard's correspondence. She did not feel triumph. She did not feel vindication. She felt something closer to sadness for a woman who had spent her life competing for things that could not be won. But she also felt something else. The confirmation that she had made the right choices. The validation that her quiet path had led somewhere better than the loud paths of the people who had tried to destroy her. She returned to the workshop where her apprentices were waiting with questions and challenges and the endless small problems that made up the work of building things that lasted. The letter went into the drawer. The past stayed in the past. The future continued to unfold. The second parole hearing came and went without Vera's involvement. She did not write a letter. She did not provide a statement. She simply allowed the process to proceed without her input. Bernard was released on a November morning, having served 4 years of his 12-year sentence. Margot reported that he planned to move to a small town in another state, far from the industry he had corrupted and the people he had harmed. He wants to know if you would ever consider speaking to him, Margot said over the phone. Vera was in the workshop, watching snow fall on the fields outside. Her apprentices had gone home early due to the weather. The space was quiet except for the crackle of the wood stove. No, she said. I do not think that would serve either of us. He accepts that. He just wanted you to know that the offer stands. If you ever change your mind. I will keep that in mind. They talked for a few more minutes about other matters. Family news. Upcoming holidays. The ordinary details of lives that continued despite everything that had happened. After hanging up, Vera sat alone in the workshop and thought about the man she had married 33 years ago. She could barely remember what it had felt like to love him. The emotions had faded so completely that they might have belonged to someone else entirely. A younger Vera, a more naive Vera, a woman who believed that patience and loyalty would eventually be rewarded. That woman was gone now. In her place was someone stronger, someone clearer, someone who knew her own worth without needing anyone else to confirm it. Bernard would build whatever life he could in his small town. He would try to make amends, or he would not. He would change, or he would remain the same. His journey was his own, separate from hers in every way that mattered. And she would continue here. In the workshop her father had built and she had restored. Surrounded by the students who were learning to carry forward what she had learned. Building things that lasted, one careful joint at a time. The snow continued falling outside. The fire continued burning inside. The work continued, as it always did, as it always would. The final image came to Vera one morning in late spring, 3 years after the gala where everything had changed. She was standing in the workshop, demonstrating a dovetail technique to a new group of apprentices. The sun was streaming through windows she had restored herself. The smell of sawdust and linseed oil filled the air with memories and possibilities. Her hands moved with the confidence of decades of practice. The wood yielded to her tools exactly as she intended. The joint came together with the satisfying precision that only quality work could achieve. Good work outlasts the worker, she told her students, echoing her father's words from so many years ago. That is the point of craft. We build things that will serve their purpose long after we are gone. The students watched and listened and absorbed. They would carry this knowledge forward, passing it to their own students, extending the chain into a future none of them could see. Vera stepped back and let the apprentices try for themselves. She watched their careful attempts, their mistakes, their corrections, their gradual improvement. This was her legacy now. Not the wreckage of her marriage. Not the scandal of her husband's crimes. Not the betrayal of a woman who had wanted what she had. This. The continuation. The teaching. The building. She thought about Bernard in his small town, trying to construct a new life from the ruins of the old one. She thought about Karin somewhere on the west coast, attempting to become someone different than the person who had caused so much harm. She wished them both well. Not because they deserved her good wishes, but because holding on to ill will served no purpose. They were living their consequences. She was living her purpose. The accounts had been settled in whatever imperfect way accounts are ever settled. The workshop filled with the sounds of work. Planes whispered against wood. Chisels bit into grain. Hammers struck with measured precision. The symphony of craft that had filled this space for generations. Vera moved among her students, offering guidance and correction, encouragement and challenge. She was 60 years old and had never felt more alive, more certain, more completely herself. The story that had begun with a cruel announcement at a gala had led here. To this workshop. To these students. To this life that was entirely her own. She could not have predicted this ending when she sat frozen in that restaurant, absorbing her husband's contempt while the world continued around her. She could not have known that the worst moment of her marriage would become the first moment of her real life. But that was how it had happened. The destruction had become the foundation. The ending had become the beginning. The woman who had been dismissed as dead weight had discovered she was the only thing keeping the legacy alive. Vera picked up a plane and returned to work. Around her, her students did the same. The day continued, full of small challenges and small victories, the ordinary stuff of meaningful lives. Outside, the field stretched toward the tree line, green with spring growth. The farmhouse stood solid against the sky, as it had for 4 generations. The world turned, indifferent to individual stories, but somehow always making room for the people who built things that lasted. And in the workshop, surrounded by the tools her father had used and the students who would carry forward what she taught them, Vera Sutton smiled. Not the controlled smile she had worn at the gala, hiding devastation behind composure. A real smile. Full and genuine and earned. The smile of a woman who had finally, completely, become herself. The end.